Welcome to Airway Exchange, the podcast for empowering educators and inspiring future CRNAs, a new series of Beyond the Mask supported by AA&A.
We're your host team. I'm Greg Collins.
I'm Nikki D'Amico.
I'm Erin Martin.
And I'm Louisa Martin. We're here to support the community of CRNA educators with conversations to explore, learn, and grow.
To pursue excellence in the evolving field of nurse anesthesia education.
And to champion our students and enrich the future of the profession.
This is Airway Exchange.
Welcome back to Airway Exchange. We are very happy to have you back as a repeat listener, we hope. I'm Greg Collins, one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined tonight by my lovely co-host, Erin Martin. Hi, Erin.
Hi.
We are right in the middle of a wellness theme. Last week, we talked about faculty wellness, and I think, as is very important to all of us as faculty members, our theme for this episode is going to be student wellness. And because of that, we all, I think, care deeply about it, but a lot of us lack some expertise. And so we went out and found a guy. I'd like to welcome Matt Zinder. Matt, I'm going to give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, hi there, Greg and Erin. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I really do appreciate it. And let's see, start from the beginning. I am a practice owner. I am based in Maryland. I own a mobile anesthesia group that covers locations throughout the entire state of Maryland of surgeon-owned, single specialty, freestanding ambulatory surgery centers. We cover the whole state. We've been in business since 1984. I am second generation CRNA. My father actually started the practice again back in 1984. But I would say probably about 10 years into my anesthesia career, I began to gain an interest in education and speaking. What started my speaking career was what I primarily do, and that was the topic of business of anesthesia. And then kind of as I started to get ingrained into the lecture circuit and working with some universities here and there, obviously the topic started to expand. And then that, along with, I would say, the stress of running a practice, I started to become very interested in healthcare provider wellness. And I started to speak on that after doing a lot of research, also practicing what I preach, getting involved in doing certain things for myself and seeing self-improvement in that regard. And then really started to jump in with both feet as far as education, reading, writing, researching, speaking on the subject. And then that led to a tutoring program that I co-founded and now co-own called Program Prep, which is a tutoring program that assists anesthesia students and residents to be successful in their programs, pass the C exam, and pass the NCE. And as you can well imagine, we have people come to us that are a bit troubled in their programs, whether it be having trouble passing the boards or passing the C or whatever it is. And we assist them with that. And where I come into the program, I do it with two other CRNAs, Michael and Annette Storm. They have a platform called Storm Anesthesia Review, and they're wonderful. They take care of the didactic. But what makes the tutoring program unique is that we address the stressful side of getting through these programs and taking the C and taking the NCE. So I teach them stress management techniques and strategies, because we feel like that is one of the missing pieces of education and one of the missing pieces of how you can be successful in these high stakes exams. I've been doing that for 5 years, over 500 students, and adding that aspect to it has really increased success for a lot of people. And I, adjuncted a bunch of programs. I just took an assistant professor position at the brand new anesthesia program in Wilmington at Wilmington University in Delaware. And so pivoting to academics, I love it. I feel like if you love what you do for a living, you don't work a day in your life. So lots going on, but I love it all. So, but again, thank you so much for having me.
Matt, we were really glad that you're here to share with us tonight. I think your brief little bio that you shared there really speaks to your expertise. Tell us, what do you think in terms of, obviously in your role as a tutor, you see those students that are prepping for the big exams or maybe struggling. What about just the everyday CRNA student, CRNA resident? What are their most impactful stressors? And more importantly, I think we understand as faculty what their stressors are, but how do they internalize that, and what are the big overarching concerns that you see in that population?
Well, the biggest thing is, to me, that they are coming from the ICU, right? So everyone that comes into these programs is an experienced healthcare provider. To me, that means that they have already had the culture problem that we have in healthcare ingrained into them, which is we are taught and expected to only take care of others and not ourselves. And when you go through the trenches of an ICU, depending on how many years you've been in those ICUs, there could be already a level of stress, burnout, cynicism, those types of things. And then you generally will carry that culture into this program. And also you can add to that problem of most of these people were the big fish in the small pond. Well, now they go in and they are equal in that they're tiny fish in a very large pond. And that adds to self-worth, self-esteem, stress in that regard, because now they're starting from square one where they were the experts before, where they worked in the ICUs, which is not an easy place to be an expert. So now add all of that baggage that they may have had, and this of course does not, I'm not saying this is everyone, but add that baggage that they may have had with that culture problem that we have in healthcare, put that into the stress of this intense educational program, and that just adds to it. So you enter a very intense educational program where you have a culture that you're not supposed to take care of yourself, only others. Well, that carries over into you're probably still not sleeping very well. You're probably not coping well with high levels of stress. You're probably not eating great. You're probably claiming that you don't have enough time for exercise, all of the above. And then that can come to a head at certain points of these programs, whether it be in clinical or having to pass one of the big tests or having to pass a big test in a class. And that's where we start to see the negative health outcomes and the negative cognitive outcomes that can come along with this poor self-care. So I think that's a lot, it's not an indictment of the programs because they have to be intense. They have to present this information in a certain way in a very short amount of time. And so that's necessary. But when you have an individual who has been ingrained in this culture going in and maybe not practicing the self-care that they need to, then those negative health outcomes could occur. So that's probably where it could come from, depending on what program they're in and what ideology they have themselves.
Do you see, so I've been at this for a while, Greg's been at this for a while, you have. It feels like, as much as I hate to keep bringing up the C word, but COVID really changed things. I know that we have found that what used to, the kind of baseline stress that you described, that I think we all probably came into our programs with because we were ICU nurses for all those reasons that you just described, it feels like in the last 5 years, today's applicant was working in those ICUs during COVID. And so do you see differences in the kinds of stress or maybe where that baseline lives in people who are maybe starting anesthesia programs in the last year or two than we've seen previously?
Absolutely. So I've been researching and teaching this for probably the last 8 to 10 years. And one of my big issues was this culture where we're just not supposed to pay attention to this. And if you can pull a silver lining from the pandemic, it at least brought this problem to the forefront. But that doesn't help the fact that we had ICU nurses coming into these programs pre-pandemic, sure, just as I described, could be a bit cynical, could be a bit tired, could be already a bit burnt out, but it could be one of the reasons they want to change their profession or elevate their profession. But then you can add to that PTSD. You could add to that serious psychological struggles from what they had just experienced. And those experiences no one signed up for. So having to bag a body literally daily, if not multiple times a day, that, people, were affected by that. And then, because I do a lot of research on PTSD and healthcare providers as well. And it doesn't just have to be a seminal event that creates that. Another criteria that a lot of people are unaware of as far as diagnosis is exposure to long-term chronic stress. So when you come from the trenches that were the ICUs during the pandemic, then people came in to this very intense experience affected. And then also there were even people during the pandemic that were in these programs that then had to either be affected, their curriculum was affected, their ability to work with each other. So peer support was broken down. And it was a very difficult time. So that was a long answer to a short question. But yes, absolutely. There was a definite effect from the pandemic. And again, one of the silver linings was it brought this need to pay attention to provider wellness to the forefront, at least probably in the first few years. I'm also kind of seeing that the culture has kind of snapped firmly back into place currently, because I'm now hearing the common phrase, I'm burnt out on hearing about burnout. And to me, that's a symptom of this culture, right?
Mhm.
So, but again, I've kind of taken it on as a personal mission to keep working on this culture problem that we have, because I believe that if you take care of yourself first, you're going to be a more productive and better provider for others. So, but yes, the pandemic definitely changed the paradigm.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, and you also in your earlier statement mentioned the personality types, the big fish in the little pond. That's the type of people we attract into our programs. That's the type of people we want in our programs that we actively recruit into our programs. But they also probably have a little bit different way of coping and a little bit different way of managing stress than, the average personality type. How do you see that playing in, that these are ultra type A individuals that are showing up to our doorsteps and, expecting us to educate them, but also expecting us to keep them well and to keep them sane, for lack of a better word? How does that personality type respond better or worse to those stressors?
Again, this is going to be a blanket statement, and this does not apply to everyone, but they don't deal quite all that well with this change because, okay, type A, you're in an ICU, you're the big fish, you're the competent one, you are the one with experience, you're the one that people look to, you're the charge nurse, you're dealing with the sicker patients, you're dealing with requests of taking the sicker patients from the surgeons or the physicians that cover, I say surgeons because I work SICU, so of course I go immediately to my experience, but surgeons or the physicians or whoever's running that particular ICU, and you are that professional. And then being that type A, you have ambition as well, and that ambition has led you to have this desire to advance your career. I'm sure the current money in this current marketplace helps with that decision as well. But you then go into this incredibly competitive process of even trying to get into the program in the first place, which is unprecedented right now. And then you get into this program and the experience kind of hits you like a ton of bricks because it is very different. The responsibility is exponentially higher, and you go in from square one. You now know nothing. You thought you knew kind of everything, but it's one of those rude awakenings. So that's very difficult for that type of a personality. It's difficult for any personality if you come from a setting where you were very confident in what you were doing. And now you don't know anything, and you're constantly reminded of that, whether it be through your curriculum, or you're constantly reminded of that depending on who you end up with as your preceptor. And that doesn't feel so good, right? So what's important to me for students is that if you're going to do or embark on this amazing journey, and it is, and it's worth every second, every penny, every minute, you have to enter that not just with interest and with experience, but you have to enter it with tools for coping, because it's not a benign experience. It's very difficult. It's designed to be difficult. It's not a benign profession. It's a very stressful profession. And you do have to be put through the paces when you're going through these experiences. But if you enter it well ingrained in the culture of poor self-care and healthcare providers, then there's going to be difficulty for many individuals. Not all, but many individuals will have difficulty. I had difficulty when I was training and was able to lean on my peers and had the support. But it is very, very difficult. So with that type of a personality specifically, it's to get knocked off of a pedestal can be very, very hard from a cognitive, social, psychological standpoint. And then it's that part where, do I have the coping mechanisms to then get myself up and get myself back up to that point of feeling confident and doing, safe anesthesia. So that's what the 3 years are for. But getting through that 3 years is not easy. But that's why I'm very interested in integrating a lot of these practices into programs.
So, how do we do that? That was going to be my next question. So, it feels like as programs, we are not only tasked now with teaching them anesthesia and how to do that, but students are coming in with expectations that there will be structured wellness content. In our interviews this fall, we had a lot of questions about that. What do you have? What do you do for your students for wellness? It's becoming something that they're expecting to see it on the menu. So, for programs, our last week's topic was about faculty wellness. How do we work in making sure our students are well, along with all the other stuff we have to work in? What are some kind of real life achievable things that we as programs can do to help our students?
That's something I'm working on right now with the program that I previously mentioned. I am working to infuse wellness curriculum throughout the entire 3-year process. Now, there are many programs out there, and I salute every program that puts any effort in whatsoever, because I know the COA basically just says you need wellness content, and that's where it ends. So you could literally make them watch a YouTube video on wellness and you fulfilled your requirement for COA. So there are some programs that are having a full wellness course and they're integrating it into some semester, which is a great undertaking because that's more than usual or more than historically usual. What I wish to do with the program that I'm working with right now is to infuse it throughout the entire 3 years. So what the plan will be is, or how we're doing it is, I'm going to be doing an entire wellness workshop at orientation, which will be a full day wellness workshop. And then taking those, there are different aspects of that workshop, and we're going to infuse it into, now we use the Canvas platform. So it'll be a module in every single semester that involves wellness. And there will be wellness assignments, meaning and assignments, not write a 20-page paper on meditation, but assignments meaning activities. And those activities will be tracked, meaning we wish to create an expectation. This is, to me, just as important as learning how to intubate. It's just as important as learning how to pick whatever, do regional, do POCUS, whatever. Pick, our usual skill set and add to that the need for self-care. So what I'm trying to do is infuse this training not only to change that culture, but create the expectation. I call it self-care as a condition for competent practice. To me, if you are not a healthy practitioner, you're probably not as competent as you could be as a provider for others. So if we start in training and we integrate these practices, then hopefully we can change that culture. So that's how we're working on it in the program that I'm a part of. We are actually going to have separate modules within the online platform for wellness every single semester of the 3-year process, and it will build upon itself. So they'll have the baseline training in the early years, and then as we move on, it'll be more like, okay, let's report what we've been doing, let's show outcomes. And honestly, I do hope to show outcomes from a research standpoint and show that it is an aspect of success for students. And if we can add that, and I have shown that, nothing formal as far as written research studies, but I have all the data. I have shown that from the tutoring program. Again, 5 years, over 500 students. By adding in that wellness component where people come to us and say, I've taken the boards 4 times, and every single time I sit down to the boards, I can't think. I'm terrified. I don't even know my own name anymore. Well, if you add in actual stress management techniques, which are research-backed and extremely effective, then they passed that 5th time. It was not the information. It was the fact that they were in a full-on sympathetic stress response, and they literally were not perfusing their cortex. There's a physiological reason why people can't think straight when they're in a full-on stress response. So if you manage those understandable symptoms, then they can find success. So if we infuse that training within the entire program, then I believe, and I hope to show outcomes, that these students will find success throughout the entire experience and also on the boards when they're finished.
I love the idea of structure and making it part of the curriculum. Outside of the structure of wellness or the structured pieces of wellness that we can implement, what about just day-to-day interaction? I spend a lot of time with the residents and in the classroom, on campus. What are some things that I can do, look out for, be more proactive about in terms of interacting with them as an individual faculty member, maybe not as a program, but just as me interacting with them? How can I improve their wellness?
Well, I think you're probably, the way you just described it, I think you're already doing it, checking in. You got to check in with these people. You have to ask how they're doing, give them a safe space to respond however they want without any worry of a punitive response or a judgmental response. Show understanding of the stress that they're going through, because it goes a long way to hear, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's understandable that you feel that way. That's totally normal that you feel that way. And then, of course, you can start getting into recommendations. I think one of the most beneficial things that you can do is not only check in with them and give that support, maybe set up a structure for peer support as well, but then also make recommendations for things that they can actually do, like actionable items, like download the Insight Timer app and start doing guided meditations. And I mean, every single day for 5 minutes, and you're going to see an improvement on what you just told me that you're struggling with. Let's take 30 to 60 seconds. I'm going to teach you how to do abdominal breathing with box breathing. I journal. Let me show you how I do this. Let me show you how it helps me. And maybe you should start doing this too. So anything that you do, you could pass that information on. Look into some of those other things that are recommended by research, folks like me, and recommended to your students. And you'll find that if they are compliant, and it is an if, but if they are compliant or they are interested in truly changing their own situations, and they start to practice what you recommend, I promise you're going to see a difference in that person.
How do we help students appreciate that that is as important as a day off? Because when we talk about wellness, what we hear a lot is we just need more days off. And that, has its limit. So what do you have as suggestions for faculty, for programs on how we can, and maybe you've already answered this, maybe it's starting from the beginning and weaving it into the program, but what are some other, as Greg said, actionable things besides just more time off?
They do need some time off, but you're right. There's a limit to that. And if you can integrate, and just like you said, if you can start from the beginning, that's very helpful. But also, first of all, start with practice what you preach, because we're all members of the culture. So we all have to practice what we preach. Once you start looking into some of these things to help with your own practice, you're going to want to pass that on as an educator. And that's where it started for me. A lot of people ask me, and I might be stealing one of your questions here, but a lot of people ask me, how did you get into this space? How did you get into wellness? And my answer is always the same. It was for self-preservation. So not only can anesthesia be a super stressful profession, but running a practice pretty much is worse than being at the head of the bed. So doing both, because I'm still very clinical, because I fill in all the holes on my schedule when I can't find providers to cover my facilities, it was making me sick. I was absolutely feeling very negative health outcomes related to the fact that my emotional well-being was directly connected to what was going on in my practice. So if things were going great, I felt great. If things were going terrible, which most of the time they were, because that's the nature of trying to run a practice, I was feeling terrible. So I had already had a little bit of a background in the space. I've been a hypnotherapist for about 15 years. So I had a little bit of background and the knowledge of what things, doing things to improve those types of situations. And I started to look into more. And the first time I ever experienced meditation, I had been reading on it, but I hadn't really done it. I remember pulling into my driveway at the end of a very miserable day. It was super stressed out. It was very late. It had been a very long day, and I was not happy. And I don't even know why I did this. And I don't even know why it was on my phone. I can't remember. But I pulled up an app called Aura. And by the way, anything I recommend, I have no financial affiliation with, just out of the gate. But I pulled up an app called Aura, which gave one free 3-minute guided meditation a day. And I just didn't even get out of my car. And I just listened and followed along with the prompts of this 3-minute guided meditation, and I felt instant results. And I've been doing it every day since. So it's about doing it yourself to maintain your own well-being, and then encouraging these students to do the same, and then doing it with them. So at the beginning of a class. Okay, everybody, we're going to do a breathing exercise before we get started. Let's all relax. Let's get into a comfortable position in your seats. By the way, if you don't know how to do it, this is how you do it. And I teach them the, abdominal breathing technique, which is the breathing exercises are probably the most effective technique for acute stress. They're incredibly effective, but they're very technique based. It's not just about taking a deep breath, but if you follow that technique, it's very, very effective. So first teach them how to do it and then do it with them and then get you started with your class. And if you do that every day and you normalize it, okay, everybody, let's listen to a guided meditation right now before we get started. That's kind of how you infuse it. It literally could be before every lecture. And then in the break room, hey, let's do some breathing exercise, or stand at the head of the bed during clinical. Okay, we're setting up for the morning. Okay, if we hit some stress, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to be with you. And those types of things, showing support, showing that you understand what they're going through, that goes a long way. So you can almost integrate it without people really noticing what you're doing, and then they'll realize pretty quickly if they came in stressed that they feel different. And there are so many tools that you can use kind of covertly that are very effective. I'll give you one more real quick. I once was pushing my patient into an operating room, and it'd been an operating room I'd been in many, many times, and getting ready to do a general, getting the patient over to the OR bed, and I felt physically different to the point where I kind of stopped and realized that I felt physically different. And then quickly realized, after I realized the physical feeling, I realized they were playing meditation music in the OR. And that alone, that OR was unchanged, except for them playing meditation music. Now, I felt different. It definitely made the patient feel different for the better. But just imagine pushing your patient into the OR, and for a student pushing a patient into an OR, they're already a little nervous because they're at the head of the bed. They're being evaluated. They want to do a good job. They push the patient in the OR, but they're playing AC/DC. Think of the difference in how they feel, whether it be the spa music during induction or AC/DC during induction. That affects every individual in that room, including the patient. So it's these little things that we can do. You walk into a classroom and you're about to take a test, you're about to give a big high stakes test. How interesting would it be to be playing spa music or meditation music when you have students walking in to take a big test? Calm them down so they're in parasympathetic, so they can think straight, those types of things.
That's great. I think that one of the barriers that we have, and I'm speaking personally because I had to overcome this when I started in academics, is that when I put myself in the role of the student, mid-20s, I really, in hindsight, look back and see myself as being 10 foot tall, bulletproof, completely resilient. Nothing I could do a 24-hour shift back then and maintain my eyes open the whole time. And I lose track a little bit about how fragile sometimes, not only mentally, but physically, how fragile the human body is, even at 25 years old. How do we overcome the barrier of hindsight and overcome the barrier of thinking of ourselves as students? And, we got through it, and we did it in hindsight most of the time with a bootstrap and just hard work and great effort. How do we kind of overcome that with faculty members as a whole to kind of put ourselves in a little bit different position, a little different frame of thought? And compassion is probably the wrong word here, but maybe a little more empathetic and understanding.
The way I take your question, and I'll put it, to put it another way, is how do we change the culture?
No,
right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right. So and that's a tough nut to crack. What we can do is communication. What we can do is education. I speak all over the country on this subject, and I talk about the culture. I talk about how we have to practice what we preach. I talk about how if we expect to be competent and safe practitioners, we have to engage in self-care. We owe it to our patients. We owe it to ourselves. You have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put it on your neighbor. I use aviation like crazy in all of my comparisons, and I do lectures on the comparison between the two professions. But we have a lot to learn from them because they are mandated to take care of themselves, or they are not professional pilots. Why? Well, because human life is at stake. Well, can we think of another profession where human life is at stake? Right? So it's shocking to me that we are just allowed to go our own way. We can We can live in this unhealthy culture. We are encouraged and put on a pedestal for grinding it out and going into work sick so we don't knock a peg down on the call schedule. It's wrong. It's just wrong. So really, it's about communication. It's about education. You can't go up to a practitioner and say, well, this is what you should do. You have to do it now, because that's not how it works in this profession. Now, I have always said, and I say this in my lectures, there is a short-term, mid-term, and long-term solution to this culture problem. The short-term solution is we take matters into our own hands and we practice what we know to be right for wellness, for our own well-being. The mid-term solution is we change curriculum and we normalize this behavior in our trainees so they exit programs already practicing this and being healthy people, being healthy practitioners, being competent practitioners. The long-term solution, and it's a very long-term solution because of the personalities that exist in healthcare, is we change policy. We mandate it, just like the aviators. We make it an expectation that healthcare providers take care of themselves so they can be competent providers for others. To me, that's a no-brainer. I know I'm biased, but I think that we would have a very different system if we changed care for caregivers. So as far as the current state of affairs, it's about, like I said, education, communication, demonstration, something I really like to do when given enough time at conferences, demonstrating these stress management interventions and activities. And that can be a game changer for some people. I've had a lot of feedback because people don't even know how effective it is because they've been taught not to engage in it because it takes time, it takes effort. But once people experience it, it can truly be a game changer for them, for their own health. So it's tough. It is tough to work with people that are ingrained in their ideology, in their culture, in their careers. But I tell you, just from personal experience, once you actually engage in it, experience it, feel the outcomes, you want more.
I have a follow-up a little bit to that. In terms of, we're getting ready to graduate a cohort on Friday, and then we roll immediately into the admissions process. And one of the things we talk ubiquitously about at all of our conferences, particular education conferences, is identifying somebody with resilience. We know that somebody that possesses good personal resilience is going to be successful in a CRNA program. To me, I think, especially listening to you the last few minutes, I think grit and resilience is a byproduct of someone who has adapted and taking care of themselves and well. So what are some things that we can look for in applicants to see that they're coping, to see that they practice wellness, besides flat out asking them because they're going to tell us what we want to hear? What are some maybe covert ways that we can identify that in our applicants?
Man, that's a good question. I got to write that one down. Man, that's a really good question. That's the secret sauce, isn't it?
It is.
I think if I were, and I will, I have been and I will be part of that interview process, sitting on that panel, I am a student of body language. All right. So first of all, you have to really analyze appearance. And we're all healthcare providers. We can walk into a pre-op holding area and know if you're going to have a tough anesthetic or not, just by looking at your patient, right? We've all got enough experience for that. So we should use those same assessment skills on these applicants, quite frankly. Look at this person. Do they look rested? Do they look like they engage in activity? How do they respond to the questions? How do they respond to tough questions as opposed to easy questions? When you do ask wellness questions, and I do believe that should be part of an interview, watch that body language. You can tell if you become a student of body language. If you ask a question about wellness, and I go right into, are there any things that you currently do? You're an ICU nurse. Is there anything that you currently do for stress management? If they cross their arms when they start to answer that question, that's a little bit of a red flag about whether or not they either engage in it or they don't like the subject talking about wellness, or they're stressed out people. And also the interview process is stressful. So you can get a window into their coping right then and there, real time, especially if, I don't know how you guys do it, but I know that I've sat in on panels where I really felt sorry for the applicant because it was like 8 of us and one of them, and we had it set up like, the Spanish Inquisition, and it's a stressful process. How are they responding to that? And those types of things probably could give you a window into some coping. Now, again, it's not guaranteed. That's why I ask direct questions about it, because that also can give you a little bit of a window into, if they're going to try to say what you want to hear, you can kind of tell when they do that too. But again, that's why the interview process is so difficult and why the selection process is so difficult. But to me, if I really try to pay attention to the body language, because they'll show if they start looking all over the place when they're answering the question about whether or not they're engaging in any type of self-care, those types of things. So look into that as an interviewer, because that really can tell a lot. You can tell if a person is, if you really truly read up on the subject, you can tell if a person's telling the truth or not. You can tell if a person wants to be there or not, or wants to be talking to you, or feels more comfortable with a certain person in the room to talk to them as opposed to the person asking the questions. So when it comes to interviewing, that would be a technique I would use. And quite frankly, direct questions I think are good, because they're probably not typically asked. These people will have been in 5 or 10 other interviews. And to me, that's probably not the most common question. How do you take care of yourself? What do you do to take care of yourself? What do you do in stressful situations? Do you have any techniques to deal with stressful situations in the moment? What are those? That type of thing. Have you ever experienced a stressful moment in the ICU? How did you deal with that? And just see how they respond, both by, articulating it and what their body language looks like.
If you had to tell us to do one thing as faculty people, that would be the game changer, what would that be?
So I'm speaking to the faculty member, or the faculty member is speaking to the student? So
I would say both. Can we do both
Okay.
of those? So as faculty, what can I do for myself that's going to help me be less stressed? I know last week's was about faculty wellness, but as we're talking about putting on our own masks first, what can we do? And then what's the one thing, if we had one thing to pick to help our students, what would it be?
Okay, so I'm gonna give you 2 answers to that, because the first answer is for all human beings, and that is sleep. Sleep is the non-negotiable for health and wellness. There is nothing in our physiology that isn't affected by sleep, both positive or negative, depending on how much you get. And we as healthcare providers, as part of our profession, are expected not to sleep, depending on the situation you're in and the institution in which you work. But then also, even if you don't do call at your particular job, like if we are full-time academics, we're generally not going to also do call on our one day off to go do clinical. But stress can keep you from sleeping. Poor diet can keep you from sleeping. Lack of exercise can keep you from sleeping. So that is the non-negotiable for all human beings. We must sleep, and we must get quality sleep. We have to allow ourselves 7 to 9 hours of sleep opportunity a night, 7 days a week. Now, again, if you're on call, I know that's not possible, but we have to adjust to that. You can be perfect in all aspects of life. You can exercise, you can eat perfectly, you can meditate every day, you can literally do everything perfectly. But if you get 4 hours or 3 hours of sleep a night, all of that is out the window. You're not a healthy individual, period. End of story. That's not an argument. So that's number one. You must sleep. Okay. So now speaking to the educator or the faculty on how to work through their own stress, I would say that everyone is different. And I know this is probably kind of a little bit of a cop-out answer, because I know that what works for me, but I recommend multiple things to people because different things are going to work for different people. And everybody has different levels of stress. And everybody has those different levels of stress affecting their well-being differently, because everybody's different. All of the stress that we experience is self-generated. Now, that comes from how we were raised, our memories, our experiences, the type of setting we're in, or the quality of our social relationships, the quality of our personal relationships. All of the above goes to contributing to what we report as stress. So because of that, my first recommendation is to engage in some time to become self-aware of your situation, because that's the first thing I recommend when I get into the actionable items in my lectures about stress management is, are we even aware that we're stressed out in the first place? Because for some people, it's our baseline, right? So we have to be self-aware, a little bit of emotional intelligence there thrown in, right? It's our first step of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. So once we become self-aware, then we have to take efforts to engage in these very effective interventions for self-care. So for me, a go-to is meditation. So I highly recommend that people look into the practice of mindfulness meditation. It's a game changer. Again, I think that's a required activity for all humans too. So I think if everyone, as part of our culture, our daily lives, just like getting up to brush our teeth in the morning, we all meditated for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 minutes every single morning or every single day, I think it'd be a very different world. So I think that's probably one of the bigger game-changing activities that one could add to their lives with little to no time commitment that can really dramatically change things for an individual. And there's 1,000 apps out there. Again, I am not affiliated with any of them other than being a user or a consumer, but Calm, Headspace, Insight Timer, fantastic. Insight Timer has over 300,000 free guided meditations on it. So you could literally put anything that you might want to work on into a search bar and something relevant is going to come up, and they're guided meditations. So you don't have to think about technique. You just follow along with the prompts. And speaking to the student, same exact comments. When I'm working with the tutoring students, I have a whole repertoire of things that I want them to do after I go through a whole intake with them. What are you going through? Tell me about your background. What are you struggling with? What's going on? The first 3 things that I recommend are a daily mindfulness meditation, breathing exercises, and hypnosis. Now, hypnosis is a little bit more into the weeds, but it's incredibly effective for stress management and totally research backed. Unfortunately, carries a lot of misconception and stigma. But if you look at New England Journal, Pain, AANA Journal, JAMA, you will find research that backs efficacy of everything that we're talking about tonight. So I would say meditation for students as well, as far as recommendation for a very tiny intervention that could literally pay incredible dividends almost instantly. And that's really probably one of the more dramatic things that one could see as far as change is concerned.
Matt, you've been incredible tonight. Thank you for sharing your insight. Tell our listeners where they can get a little bit more of you.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I am on the lecture circuit. I speak all over the country. Check out your local state meeting, or I speak for a few private anesthesia conferences, do a few grand rounds every once in a while. I do have a website that talks about what I do all over the place, MatthewZinder.com. And I do have a podcast on wellness. It is called the Provider Wellness Podcast. I've been doing it for the last 5 years. I have about 62, 63 episodes on provider wellness, speak with experts in the field, very conversational, just like this, and just all experts of every single thing you can think of in terms of wellness, just to pass the word. So, but yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you again.
Looking to elevate your impact as a nurse anesthesiology educator? Then join us February 4th through the 7th at the Omni Louisville Hotel for EDGE. Educate, develop, grow, engage. This in-person event offers up to 18.5 Class A credits and deep dive small group sessions on virtual reality and education, AI innovation, gamification, wellness, and more. EDGE is where passionate educators connect, collaborate, and shape the future of nurse anesthesia learning. So register now using the link in the show description, and we'll see you there.